I'll call this meeting to order with a roll call attendance, please.
Okay. Commissioner Foister.
Here.
Bliss. Nelson.
Here.
Petroselli.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here.
And Chairperson Montague.
Here.
Okay.
Do you want to introduce our new commissioner?
Sure. Definitely like to welcome Pam Foister to the Planning Commission. She was appointed last month and maybe earlier this month. And Pam's been very active in town goings on since she moved here, what, 3 years ago? 4 years ago? 8 years ago. That's the way my brain works.
Okay, 9, yeah.
And you were in Sun Valley? No.
Jackson.
Jackson Hole. Jackson Hole, right.
I read the letter.
But welcome aboard.
Thank you. Well, with that, welcome. We'll move into a work session for discussion regarding updates to the RMC Chapter 7, Planning and Zoning, and I will turn it over to TJ and Katie.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. How is everyone tonight?
Well,
Good.
cross-eyed.
All right, so I am going to hopefully listen more than I talk tonight to get your thoughts on what we've provided so far. But I am going to go through a quick overview of some highlights that we made of changes we made since the last time we were before you last month. And then a couple more updates of what's to come. And then hopefully we can just kind of have a good discussion about if you see concerns, comments, anything you have that for us. And then we can hopefully keep moving forward and get this wrapped up, hopefully in the next 2 months, ideally, but we'll give you a timeline at the end of an estimate for you. So diving right in, and as always, just feel free to interrupt if you have any questions or need clarification. I wanted to go over a few of the changes specifically made since we were before you on January 31st, because I do think it's important to note what we've changed, because I know the track changes documents have gotten so much into them. I did want to note that in the zoning application types and processes, conditional uses have gone back to where they were supposed to be, which was before the Planning Commission. So that change was made, and thank you for letting us know that mistake we had made last time. The land use table looked like it was all new because we had reorganized everything. We consolidated some uses that seemed like they were the same, but slightly different wording. And we also went through and added drive-through facilities as discussed. We put those in some specific standards that you probably saw. And then board rooming houses and dormitories, based on the direction we received last month from the commissioners, we put those as a conditional use in the MR, HB, DS, and GC. So kind of just wanted to highlight a couple of the changes that we made based on feedback we received. Also, because we had the go ahead. If you remember your code right now, a lot of the zone districts, especially industrial districts, had a lot of performance standards. We relocated those and put them in a new section of performance standards. So hopefully you all had time to take a look at those, and you can provide us some comments on what you think about that. With those in there, there's a few that are exceptions for certain districts, but mostly they have been created for townwide, which makes sense based on how they read. And then a couple other changes that we made. I1 is now light industrial. I2 is now proposed to be general industrial district. Those, as we talked about last time, would also involve moving forward with amendment to the official zone map, just to change them on the zone map also. But we made the applicable name changes throughout the code where relevant. We also took your supplemental commercial design standards and we brought those into the code so that they're actually in there directly after the residential development design standards. And then based on feedback we received, we put in some industrial design standards. Those were left very basic at this point in time. We felt like we wanted to have something in there for the town to use, and we feel like we hopefully, and we'll hear from you on this, address kind of the main concepts, such as articulation on long building walls, things like that. But we didn't get into a lot of detail because that's probably something the town may want to have more discussion on as they move forward in the future about specific industrial design standards. Also, accessory uses and structures we talked about were a little bit tricky fitting into the land use table. So we created a separate section of standards for those that were in Article 4 or Section 4. And then Section 9, definitions. If any of you opened that, I'm sure at first it looked a little overwhelming. I know we added a lot of new definitions. Hoping to hear if you have any concerns with any of those. It really adds a lot of clarity for people using the code, for staff and citizens, to have all those definitions in there. So if they look at the land use table and they wonder what exactly they fall under, that definition section will definitely, hopefully help them out. With that said, those are changes that we did make in response to what we heard last month. Based on feedback we received, we also wanted to note we did not make some changes, which we feel is what everybody agreed upon. So back in the code as was are some of those specific performance standards for the DS district due to the uniqueness that was discussed by commissioners of the DS district and how it's important to keep those in there. And there's a good reason for them. So those are back in as was, along with the maximum building size limitations that were scattered a little bit throughout some different zone districts. Those have all been put back in and will remain in the code as they were. One more follow-up for you is that we did provide the table of potential discussion items for the town to continue on with in the future as was requested. We're happy to keep adding to this. We're happy to break it down a little bit more, but we did want to start with just kind of a generic list. The reason we got this to you at this point in time is that we know some of you commissioners have given us really good feedback and comments, and we didn't address them at this point in time because they weren't part of the scope of work. And so we really felt like this helps go ahead and show you that we haven't ignored them. They're put on the list for the future for when the town has the time or the want to move forward with them.
Thanks, Katie. I really appreciated seeing that list. It's under my pillow.
Nice. And then Karen, do you have a question?
No,
Okay. I saw a hand up on there.
That's a question for the chairperson,
Okay.
Madam Chairperson. Our audience requested to make a comment regarding last week's hearing. It might apply to what we're discussing, but it might not. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, yes, wait till the end of the meeting. No, I'm just kidding.
I know, I hate to make the wait till the end.
I think that we can have a comment now if no one objects, if it's not messing everything up.
Let's get a deposit.
Good.
Fine with it. Katie, do you mind hanging on for a second?
Nope, of course not.
Thank you.
We are prepared for your comment. Please approach or opening public comment.
All right, my name is Kuno Wollenweider. I live at 295 South Mary Street in Ridgway, and I'd like to make a comment about the proceedings that I've been following about the Four Winds subdivision up there. And I personally think over the next 20 some years, I think it's most important that the town pursue at least the idea of an avenue of having direct access from the town through Ridgway USA or whatever is on the other side of the highway directly up to Vista Terrace. Because that way we get the elimination of needing this new applicant to have the second egress window that this subdivision up there hasn't had for 40 years. And it also would separate the traffic between those that live up there that want to come into town to do their town business, or that want to go to Montrose to do their Montrose business, just like we have or north or south. It would separate the need for all this concentration always going north. And I'm not sure if that has been talked about, or is this even a subject that is interesting to us in the long term. But I think just like the pedestrian access for the high school, I think it's an important access to have pedestrian wise or walk wise between Vista Terrace and what's down below, which is the town. It seems strange that we have this part of town up there that's not really connected in a way to us, other than through this one exit and entry that they have right now. That's my comment. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming and sharing that. All right, we are back to Katie. If you want to wait a minute until the siren stops, that might be a good idea.
Okay.
Is that something that would be shared with the applicant or just goes on the record?
It's on the record.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful talking about, land use. An active land use application that's quasi judicial in nature, so you know, it needs to be discussed in the auspices of public hearings for that, but. Because the way I understood the comment was specific to the Four Winds development, correct? So
We can make him come back.
certainly noted, we can just relay his comment to the development team.
Yeah, that was just my question. It was procedural, not that specific. Thank you. Someone told me that siren goes off until the first person responds and then they turn it off.
Is that true?
That's my understanding.
And then why does it sometimes go again?
Because not enough people respond.
So they bring it again and say, hey, if you got your feet up, get over here.
Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's there's a secondary call, some additional issue.
Does it call fire and EMS?
I believe so. I mean, it's no, actually, I think it's fire, but the fire department can be called out like on a car wreck where there might be.
I don't think. it's
Well, I think they have pagers, so they talk, when they get a call, they talk.
Yeah, but there's.
All right. You've got the floor, Katie.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, back to that document was provided to you. I'm happy to show it on my screen and go through it if you have any specific questions. But I have it ready. If you want me to share it, just let me know. And then kind of a final wrap up of where we're at right now. I have a timeline I'm going to pull up next on the next slide, but I wanted to let you know that even since we sent you these documents about 2 weeks ago, we have been moving forward. We have section numbers added. We have flowcharts drafted and also have begun putting those in. So it's really coming together and it's going to look a lot prettier the next time you see it, hopefully, where it's going to be, we'll finalize the formatting. There's also a couple of sections of codes or chapters that you haven't seen because it hasn't been necessarily relevant, but I didn't want you to be caught off guard when it comes before the Planning Commission for a public hearing. And so what that's referring to is that as you saw, as we've been doing these, we've pulled things out of chapter 6 and chapter 8, and we've put them into chapter 7. Well, that means that we have this document of chapter 6 and chapter 8 that has some deleted text that will also need to move forward. It's not losing anything in the town. It's just deleting exactly what we popped in to chapter 7. But I wanted to let you know, I didn't want you to be caught off guard as this moves forward and you start seeing some other chapters. They were just kind of little pieces hanging out there that we need to get cleaned up due to the changes that we made in here. So hopefully that makes sense. We've started helping out draft a template for the application fee form, and then the town is going to take the lead on that. But we do want to recognize that because this code has references to application fees in a separate document, we need to make sure that we have that in place for you when everything moves forward. So with that said, this first timeline slide is pretty much where we've gotten to so far. We're calling it the almost finished draft we've got to you. And like I said, we've actually been making a lot of cleanup on our end, not changing text, just making sure the section numbers and flowcharts and tables are identified. So we've been moving forward on our end with that. And then we haven't confirmed these, including with Preston. So do not hold us to these, but ideally in our heads, we're curious if the Planning Commission, based on what we hear tonight, would want to try to move forward with a PC adoption hearing on March 28th, and then a town council adoption hearing on April 12th. And then brainstorming that it might be worthwhile to do a work session for the development community after, assuming it's approved, after it's approved, kind of like a how to use chapter 7 of the code, to kind of help be a little bit more customer friendly on applicants who are planning on coming in over the next few months. So that's really all that I was going to review. I'm looking more to hear from you and answer questions that you have.
All right, I'll start. I noticed a few little silly edit things that I wrote down, but I'm guessing you're gonna catch those as you go through, so they probably don't matter so much.
I would hope that we catch them, but I am happy to take your list, even if you want to just take a picture and email it to me if it's handwritten. Just to cover all the bases, the better eyes on everything, the more eyes on everything, the better. So.
Okay. I'm gonna look and see if any of them were specifically questions about the content, and if someone else wants to speak up in the meantime, go ahead.
I have a question in reading the density bonus part of it. I was unfamiliar with that. Is that something that's copied from another jurisdiction that y'all work in? I kind of read it. I was very impressed with it, but there's a lot to unpack in there. So I was jamming it before the meeting tonight. And is that something that has been used in this jurisdiction? I mean, it's a lot there. And I see a lot of good in it, and I see a lot of bad in it too. I mean, it's again, a lot to unpack, and I don't think I've unpacked it correctly, but my thought was that maybe you had seen it in operation before, and that would.
Can you help us figure out what you're looking at? What you're.
It's on land use regulation, affordable housing.
773.
Yeah, 773 incentives under density bonus. I'm sorry.
773A.
A.
So, yeah, I can give a little bit of a background for you. It is used in other towns. To be completely honest with you, it's a great tool at certain times of construction, and when the economy is in certain ways. When the economy is booming, towns have found that developers choose not to use it, especially when the cost of construction is high. They tend to not find, they'd rather sell units at a higher market rate than try to add more unit, then get more units and have some of them be density bonus. So it is pulled kind of from some different jurisdictions of what we're familiar with. It has worked successfully for communities, but it also, I have not seen it used as much when construction costs have been high over the last couple of years. Does that help? I'm happy to get into it.
That helps. I mean, I wasn't looking at it as construction. I would think I read in here that you were allowed to have possibly 2 bonus units for each unit in a general commercial district. So like somebody like Lupita's or my office building or one of the other buildings, they could have a accessory dwelling unit for each unit they have in their space that's approved. Am I reading that correctly?
Correct. On a one-to-one basis, if it's on the same property with the size limitations. So you can't make, let's say, big picture, you can't have your market rate unit be 10,000 square feet. I'm exaggerating here, and your affordable unit be 500 square feet. So there's a ratio so that your deed restricted units have to be within a certain size of the unit it's going to match. That's the market rate. So it's kind of like a 1-for-1. And then that unit would need to be restricted based on who it can be rented to. So it's an incentive if they want to have more units and build them, because you could potentially get more. And it's an incentive to the town because they would be requiring and getting those extra units would be deed restricted affordable units, or at least affordable units. Throwing in a disclaimer that I think we maybe hit upon this last month, but maybe not in a lot of detail. This is kind of a template to start discussions for the town, this affordable housing section. So we recognize that the town needs to have a lot of discussions with the community, and we're expecting that to be part of those discussions also. So,
I think this is fabulous what's here. Again, I read it, I was looking at it as the commercial being able to have an ADU, which I don't believe we allow currently under our code. But so my concern here is, again, I think this is fabulous, but if we go ahead and approve this in March and April, how are we going to change it? Aren't we approving it as is? Or we have to get it all approved before we get it all edited and blessed before we approve it? And I mean, again, there's a lot to unpack here.
I think we would have the final one before we were approving it in March. Is that correct?
I've got my work out for me.
Katie, TJ, help me recall what I remember from our conversations is that this section 7 of chapter 7 would not be codified with the other sections come time of drafting the ordinance. As you just said, Katie, this section is going to take a lot more time and energy and community, or requires a lot more time, energy, and community input before being enacted.
correct.
Is that what I recall?
Correct. Yeah, we didn't think it would be ready for adoption with the rest of the code, but we wanted to have it as a placeholder for section numbers, things like that too. But yeah, correct, Preston.
I guess that's really what I was asking. I'm real excited about it. I think it's fabulous, but I think I want to jump into it hard and won't be able to get it done in that time frame. So it's great that it's a space saver.
Yeah. So
Section 717, enforcement and administration. Letter C. I feel like there should be a notice period. I mean, there is with like, it's about if checking enforcement and that, you know, entering someone's home. And I don't know if that's something we can address now, but it seems like there should be some type of a notice period. I mean, there's a notice with everything else. If you're a renter, you know, you get a 24-hour notice from the landlord before they can enter your property. You guys know what I'm talking about here?
I can see what you're talking about.
Where are you? I'm on
717.
717, enforcement and administration,
Paragraph C.
letter C. So it's the third item in our, in Dropbox, if you're looking at Dropbox.
And I'll look for direction from the town on if they want us to look at making a revision to that or not. We don't have any objection to it. I just also want to be conscientious of the
Yeah,
scope that they're trying to stay into, so.
hear my point.
you're
Yes, yeah,
providing notice to the person.
That you want to enter their property. Yeah,
Yeah, and what do you think is reasonable?
I think at least 24 hours.
We could certainly look at that. We probably want to see how what we have currently compares to other communities. At the end of the day, folks have the right to deny entry, and then staff or whoever has the proper legal recourse to figure out how to properly inspect, right? So,
Right.
but I hear what you're saying about the notice. I mean, we can look
Yeah.
into that.
I think 24 hours is a good number. I mean, most leases have that anyways. I think that's a pretty common, I think that might be state law.
It might be. If you guys wouldn't mind looking at that and letting us know, but I'd be happy with 24 hours. I just think there should be something in there.
I think that makes sense.
What's that?
I think that makes sense.
John agrees too. I think it's simple and we could say, oh, well, town would do that anyway, but I think it's nice to have it there.
No, it should be.
And then my next comment was about planning and commission. And I don't know if this is necessary, but I didn't see where it said,
Section.
the section is 721, planning commission.
Okay.
It doesn't say anything about appointing a chair or how that's done. It doesn't mention it at all.
It's addressed in the bylaws.
Okay. That's fine. Now I have to catch up with my notes, so I'm opening it up again to whoever else wants to comment.
I've got some more questions.
And Jennifer has her hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Jennifer.
Thank you. I just because you were talking about that chapter, the first chapter, I was going to ask, when was the last time who establishes the fees? And when was the last time we had a fee, looking at the fees and raising our fees?
The town council sets the fee schedule.
I would say they've been updated within the last decade. But certainly probably not in the last 5 years. We'd have to go back to look.
It's been 5 years. That's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some fees that have been modified or enacted, fairly recently, and going back into 2019, there were some updated fee schedules, but as it relates to costs for specific development applications, yeah, I don't think that's happened in a while. As Katie was saying, we're gonna have to address that here soon to make sure everything's accounted for in conjunction with the codification of the ordinance.
Yeah, I just had a little concern about that, because I think that before in the past that we've always wanted to encourage people to develop here. And now that we're here, we want to, of course, encourage affordable housing, but I'm not sure if we want to encourage all these developers to come here and build as fast as they can. I just was hoping that our fee schedules would be updated. And so if I wanted to look at a fee schedule, I would have to come into the town to get that. Is that correct?
It's available on the town's website under the resources tab.
Oh, okay.
And that clicks you into ordinance 2019-02. So I believe that was the last time planning fees. That was what I found when I was digging through the other day.
So it was.
So are you suggesting like a tiered system so that people trying to build workforce housing would have a less of a financial barrier?
So,
Well, I know we can make changes for affordable housing and lower the fees for them, or say that they don't have to pay the fee. But I would like to see our other fees for regular developments to be increased, since everything else has been increased. I think Ridgway County was looking at increasing their fees. So I just want to make sure that our fees are where they need to be.
There was actually an article in the paper this past week about City of Ridgway having their staff recommended their fees were way out of whack and that they wanted to do an emergency ordinance to update them. The council said, no, we need to review them first. So maybe that's what you're referring to. I don't think the county is looking at changing their fees.
You're right, it was the city.
But I think we've done a better job, not that I'm criticizing the city rate, but we've done a better job of keeping our fee schedule fairly up to date. Certainly worth looking at, making sure we're in line.
absolutely, and if I may, it's really important to, for the town to evaluate it every once in a while to make sure that staff costs are being recovered. The time staff takes to administer and process applications, et cetera, that those costs are covered. So it takes some time to evaluate and figure out what to recommend. So we'll certainly do that. Jennifer, that's a great question.
And it kind of leads into the enforcement. It says 717, or I think that's Article 1, but the last one that we had in our articles today said that there was a last blurb about reimbursements to the town for their costs, out-of-pocket costs, and I didn't see that enforced in this new document.
That's a great question. So that is a clause that if it's not in the code still throughout it, it is on the application fee form that we created. So we carried those paragraphs from the code and the ordinance directly onto that application form. And that includes kind of what you mentioned too about how fees could be reduced by town council for certain things such as housing. So I will make a note though. I do want to check and make sure that we didn't remove too much as far as that goes. So I'll double check that one. Thanks.
Question on that, Jennifer, is that the reimbursement of costs that you're referring to? That cover like legal, posting,
Yes.
consulting costs? Yeah, so that's going to be on 716B.
I saw that in there. I read it. I couldn't tell you exactly where. I'm having a little trouble following my notes along with the different
So,
chapters.
Page 4 of the very top of page 4. So we brought that language directly over.
Thank you.
Okay. And are the forms and maybe fee schedule? I mean, I know it says right now that you have to go into the town to get them, but are we eventually gonna have them located on our website so they can just download them?
Maybe
I
I missed the
I'll let
question.
Chris.
Was a question about the fee schedule?
Yeah, well, that and the forms that they can fill out.
Yep, all of that is available on the town's website, Jennifer.
Oh, okay, so they can already fill it out on the website and bring it into you when they're ready, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yeah, and just to clarify, because that's a good question, that when we say the town, that means just kind of holistically the town, and it could be in the website as well. So we kind of leave everything open on it.
I see, thank you.
Yep.
I've got one.
Okay.
Section, chapters,
Section 4.
section, no, this is a different one.
Oh,
Chapter 7, section 7, affordable housing. Number 1, accessory dwelling units shall be no larger than, I believe it's 800 square feet, not 900.
That's,
I had that same thing,
I
Mark.
had the same.
I had it first.
Perfect. Okay, that was a mistake on our end from missing that. Thank you. I'll make that change.
I think we all had that one.
Oh, man.
So
I have a question.
I have newbie questions,
Go
but related to that one, so the note I wrote was that the ADU square feet could be larger than the employee housing square feet.
Yes. The employee housing, you gotta remember, is in the industrial zone, isn't it?
Do we workforce
I apologize,
housing?
I was still learning my way around the document.
And that, I don't,
We all are.
I mean, it's larger than the home occupation thing. I don't, where is the employee housing?
That's gonna be under Article 4 or Chapter 4, Section 4 zone.
Okay, sorry, because I'm still playing catch up.
Nope, you're good. And this is why we wanted to allow as much time as we didn't want to talk to you too much. We wanted to hear all these questions and thoughts. So this is great.
So yeah, my note that I wrote was, why would ADU square footage be larger than employee housing square footage?
It's always been this way.
Well,
Is that-
it was less. The original ADU square footage, I think was 600 square feet.
Right, and I remember them
Up to
asking for
800.
more,
The
town.
I think, I mean, I know that all along we've tried to do as much as we can to incentivize ADUs. I don't know why we wouldn't want to incentivize the employee housing piece as well. I'm still trying to figure out where the employee housing piece is in here.
I'm getting a page number coming for you. You would think alphabetizing would have helped, but it still takes a while. We'll
53.
have a table of contents linked eventually, which will be much.
Section 4.
Yeah, 53 and 54 of Section 4.
Thanks.
Employee housing. See, that's a new section, right?
Nope, employee housing, we did not touch at all. That's exactly what the code has right now.
well, it's an existing definition. That's what you're.
Okay, it's just a definition.
Is there an employee housing section? I don't
Yeah.
recall.
Yep, so we carried it over. It's in the code right now, and then it's been carried over. And then TJ, what was that page? Sorry.
53.
So we didn't edit anything, and that was on our list. Just as a side note, we're a little confused over what exactly this is when you also have the accessory dwelling units. So that's part of our topics of future conversation for the town, is to really nail down lodging, including different types of affordable, deed restricted, that type of housing, and employee housing we think should fall under that for more consideration.
And I'm not even seeing a square footage limitation in.
So the square footage is in the definition. The definition of employee housing is a dwelling unit that contains no more than 450 square feet.
But it gets a lot more specific than that. Located-
Yeah, then it gets more, but that's,
Located within the same structure as a non-residential use and above or behind the non-residential use in which the use of the dwelling units is secondary and subordinate to the non-residential use and restricted for occupancy only by the employees of the non-residential use.
So that's a definition from the old workforce housing.
And I see, my recollection is that came from, honestly, I think it was, the fact that people were renting units in the I-1 zone, illegally, but, there was a lot of pressure to try and create a way for businesses to actually create some employee housing in their building.
I think you're right. I think it came from the Ben Jackson proposal to rezone the next phase of the industrials, where I remember it coming. I think that
It
where he
definitely,
proposed the workforce housing there.
and it, Dan Zog had some units in his big building out in the industrial zone that he was renting. So I
Isn't
think
that too
that's-
close to the sewer plant?
Well, it was illegal, and then, I don't remember how we even changed the code to allow it in some, commercial zones. I guess the only place I can imagine it being, well, it could be allowed in either HB or GC as of right now, probably, because they allow housing as a, what?
I just did a cursory review.
So conditional use.
Yeah.
Conditional use.
And it looks like the only district I found employee housing as a use by right is under GC.
So on the same section that the chairman was asking about, is that saving space, or is that something we're going to approve in the approval process? That's chapter 771, 772.
Yeah, this is reserved for future conversation.
Okay,
This is a starting point.
That whole affordable housing section.
okay, good. Because I would like to propose different sizes for affordable housing, like stay at the 800 square feet, but if they wanted a bigger one, they pay us more money or pay a fee in lieu of, and maybe have different levels of that. And just to accommodate, I'm going to change my nameplate to ADU Jack.
I think that's gonna have to be like when we get into the things we want to update. I don't know that we're able to make substantive changes in this.
Well, this is going to be for discussion. So just when we get discussion, I've got a lot to talk about in this affordable housing.
If I may, you mentioned the fee and lieu piece, and I think that fits in well with council's last conversation about the dedicated source for affordable housing. Mayor Pro Tem Meyer brought up the fee and lieu piece, so that I think will fit well once we move the affordable housing section forward, once we get the rest of it codified. That's just my opinion, though.
I think we should have different levels of affordable housing from different footprints, but also workforce housing, different footprints and fees associated to it. So if somebody can build 1,000 square foot of ADU, we shouldn't discourage it. We might charge them a different fee, but it fits for them. So I'm all in favor of ADUs, and it's Mr. Clark's fault.
I have a in lieu comment on the parking section, section 746, M, parking, number 7, letter C. In lieu of parking, I believe it's in the parking section, that they can pay out $3,000 in lieu of a parking spot. That number seemed extremely low to me, and why wouldn't they pay out all their parking spots at that rate? Especially with the cost of property around here.
That's an old number and definitely needs to be updated.
I agree.
What, I know we're not gonna make that decision right now, but I'd say it's more in the realm of 10,000,
15.
okay?
I'll give you 20.
Just seemed really low and like, oh my God, why wouldn't you?
That's from 15 years ago, probably.
Okay,
10 still cheap, but anyways, we'll talk about
Yeah,
it later.
10 to 15. makes it.
15, I think more.
and then,
I can actually real quick, if I may, Katie, I think that's an example of, well, maybe not, but is that an example of a piece that can be transitioned out of the code and memorialized in the fee schedule? The parking and lieu fee?
TJ, weigh in on this if you want. I usually see towns have a separate document that states it. We have a couple of other clients that I'm aware of that actually are looking into the same topic right now, trying to get some feedback on up-to-date costs that they should be charging. So I know people are looking at it. It usually, you're correct, does not need to be in the code in my thought from what I've seen in the past. It can be kind of more of a policy that the town holds for that. TJ, do you have anything to echo on that?
I'm kind of torn. I think I've seen it both ways, right? Like park dedication requirements, fee in lieu, things like that are sometimes housed in the code. I could see it being a separate document in the fee schedule. I guess where my mind goes is a little bit higher level of, I'm not sure that we're going to answer this right now. I would suggest maybe leaving it in there. And then when we have the parking discussion of how many parking spaces, what's that cost be, we have that more in-depth conversation there. And because of that, leave it as is for the time being. Unless there was I'd be hesitant to just increase the fee without solid justification. Simply, I think you could get into some legal trouble with that.
I think market solid justification. The market is solid justification, in my opinion. So we should look at what other municipalities charge.
It just seems crazy low, and that someone picked up on that would really take advantage of it.
You know, the other side of the coin, though, I would say is your parking standards might be too high. You know, and you want to incentivize potentially in different locations, less parking.
We've talked about that for sure, but
Yeah,
so I think what we need to do is kind of hold this one out as another one that we work on as time allows in the future. I don't think we'd have any trouble defending increasing the fee, as Jack said, based on what other communities are charging. But I think we need to also consider, you know, I've been beating this drum the whole time we've been talking about. We need to update our parking standards. They're based in the last century. They need to be more current. So I just saw a funny article somewhere online today about how American vehicles are outgrowing the parking space.
Oh, yeah.
It's ridiculous. The size of vehicles.
So that would then go to that, was that number 9, were the recommendations that you gave us? And then we're going to prioritize those?
The list of topics.
Yeah,
I would probably say it's up to town council to prioritize them. But any insight over there in that room, happy to offer feedback on it, knowing that we've heard a lot, especially about parking, but I'm not sure if we should, as CPS, recommend you prioritizing the list based on what the council has talked about on their own discussions too.
okay.
Then I'll kind of leave that one up to you if you want us to offer ideas on prioritizing or not.
And then I know I'm repeating myself, and Preston said that there needs to be funding to make some of these changes, but it seems like maybe not all of them, you know, and maybe some of the prioritization happens in that way as well. And like you said, maybe it's not ours to do, maybe that goes to council, but I hope we can convey the importance of that, I think, to them. And then I have another item, a question this time. It's section 4, letter N, Uncompahgre River Overlay District, letter C, and then I, the first one underneath it. And it reads, these design guidelines and standards under this subsection, blah, 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 shall apply to all of the development within the UROD with the exception of single family and duplex residential buildings. And I was wondering why there's an exception.
So
And
then,
it may not be Katie, probably just
yeah.
language.
Does anyone there have any history on that?
Yeah, I think I might. I'm sure, John. I mean, I was real involved in the UROD. I mean, and I believe this is going to be conceptual. I think almost all the property in the UROD is commercially zoned. There's no real residential zoning in the UROD. There's some FD, but that would be the only thing. And I think when that UROD was written, it was perceived as a single family or duplex was a significant down zone and or a significant less of an impact. And the UROD required as very restrictive and one of it where any wall that's facing the river can only be 50 feet wide. So that makes it real hard to build a commercial building. So that 50-foot wide is very, very restrictive. And other than that, the roads you can live with, but that's tough. But I think it was to encourage a down zone use, if you would.
Okay,
That's the way I understood it.
makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it basically was just recognizing that the river frontage is one of our major assets and we want to protect it coming. I mean, look at what, again, in the last century, the city of Montrose is classic, you know, all the high industrial uses right along the river. So we dump the crap in the river. You don't need.
Go to Ohio, you want to see it horrible.
Yeah, or the Cuyahoga River, right? Burn on.
Tennessee River, it's horrible.
Well, and I was just wondering why we were being lenient on that, but it turns out I wasn't reading it right. We were trying to encourage a different use is what Jack's saying.
We might want to tidy that up a little bit, but
It could probably be cleaned up, and I was gonna say the preserve is probably the only residential. And I don't even remember what.
is that still a viable subdivision? Is that zone?
Yeah.
Or is that
Oh, yeah.
or it's still there?
Yeah, it's still.
Katie and TJ, are you following me? I just found that confusing.
I think you're right, John. That's the only one. I thought that had fallen out of favor or fallen.
No, it's still
compliance.
still in the works.
I heard you, I'm following you. I'm also trying to figure out if it's something we should be working on when that language is.
Are we good? What?
I think with the UROs we put on the priority list.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those things that we probably want to look at, not something that we can address
Today.
at this level.
Okay,
Probably want to make sure I mean, it's been around for a while. Jack's got his opinions. I think probably some of the other property owners have some, but I think it's probably worth taking another look.
No, I think it's a pretty good deal. I think it could use a little tidying up, but the conception is pretty good.
my next one is the table that's a little further down. Table T43.3.
Okay.
And this just may be my lack of understanding under childcare facilities. Then there's the subcategories of child daycare and family daycare. And I was wondering why one of them has conditional use and one of them has allowed by right. And I'm guessing that's our code, but I was just trying to understand that better.
So usually the child daycare facility is going to have a lot more impact potentially because it isn't as limited in numbers. It's limited on numbers based on the state requirements and certifications that actual childcare center has, which also is going to have more parking lot area, more traffic in and out with pickup drop off. Your family daycare follows under the code, the way it's written right now, a home occupation. And so it's limited. You don't have as much childcare allowed there. You don't have as many numbers allowed. And therefore there's a lot less impact due to parking and transit, traffic, things like that.
Makes
it's
perfect sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can keep going, but yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that table. I have to apologize. I don't know if anyone caught this. I just noticed today that we still had left a section for administrative approval requirement. And I deleted that today. We have no administrative approvals in that table of uses based on discussions months ago. So if anyone caught that, I apologize. It looks like there's still some administrative approvals in there, but those we have removed that clause because that shouldn't have been in there. So while we're on the table.
And then I have a section E, architectural standards. And I'm not sure if that's still under section 4. My notes, I'm a little confused by my notes. Letter E, architectural standards. Do we know where that is?
So we have architectural standards under each residential design, commercial design, and industrial design.
The note that was interesting to me was exterior, it was C and II, exterior metal siding not allowed to be primary finish. It's only allowed to be 20%. So I think that's residential.
Correct. And I'll have to make a note or I can check while we're on other discussions tonight. I'm not positive if we brought it into the industrial or not. So I can look into the amount of metal required that we put in.
Well, my question is with residential, I don't know that we're actually enforcing that. A structure just went up on Charles Street that's entirely metal siding
Just sold.
on the 700 block. The whole thing, it looks like a barn. The whole thing's metal siding. And so,
Sold for $1 million.
yeah, I just saw this note in here and I'm like, wait a minute, how did we let that slide through? So that might not be a question for you guys. I'm not sure.
How about
Also
also
one
one across the street?
What about,
Andy Nacit's citizens on that. Or at least.
there's a bunch of stucco.
It's, but still, it's like 80% stuff.
Well, anyways, I would think
Yeah, it
that
sounds
either
like
we
we
should
have
be
to-
enforcing this or changing it.
So it's certainly enforced, but the house or the building permit in question, I can tell you, there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of narratives requested from that. From the property owner who pulled the building permit to construct that. And I know TJ can provide a lot more context here, but that was a challenge going back and forth for months and months and months with the applicant and trying to find a happy medium, if you will. So I don't know, TJ, if you want to shed some light on that, given what transpired.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the section. I think it's page 79 of section 4, architectural standards.
Correct.
And so I guess what I will say is that there currently is very little and very limited architectural design guidelines for residential buildings. And so I don't believe that provision, I'm trying to understand exactly where it came from, but under here, C, building materials is all new, so it's not currently on the books. So yeah, as Preston mentioned, we went back and forth with that home multiple times, trying to encourage the spirit of the code to be met better. And I use those words pretty specifically because the spirit is there, but there's very little guidance and specificity in the design standards for residential. So that's why we actually went in and put in some additional standards here so that we could better review and enforce architectural standards.
So this is new language.
That's if what I'm looking at is what you.
Yeah, it is. That's what I was referring to. You found it.
It's
Correct.
different places, actually. It's under architectural standards for residential, then under GC,
Correct.
and then on page 87, 88.
So you're saying we didn't have anything like that. That's how he was able to do that.
That is correct. Yep. And
That
so,
was an
the
eyesore.
so previously, the only residential design standards were in chapter 6. And so we pulled them in, and that's essentially under E, architecture standards, the black font. And then we also brought in, as Katie mentioned, the commercial design guidelines into standards. And then we took those and put those into the industrial design standards. So now at least we have a little bit more guidance and specific standards for each of the different uses.
I think that's great.
Thanks for
Thank
shedding
you.
light on that, DJ.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jay, and thank you for updating this language so we at least have something to enforce or go on, and then we can be more lenient if we choose, but at least we have something, right?
It's less ambiguous now.
Yes. I might be getting to the end of my notes.
Michelle, if you don't mind, just making another comment on that just as we go through that, thinking about their deviations, we did put in deviations, a deviation process. So if somebody is not able to meet design guidelines or design standards, there's a process through which they can come to you all as the planning commission to request a deviation. So again, it's understanding that there's hardship potential, but at least we formalized that a little bit more too.
And I'm just for learning purposes, how did you come to 20%? Because if somebody asks, it's like, why did we pick that number?
I guess I would just say that's kind of industry standard. Which one are you referring to? The exterior? Yeah, so generally what we say is if it's a secondary or trim, it's basically 20%.
Okay.
So it's kind of industry standard. It's not necessarily, we could increase it, we could decrease it. But that's kind of I think that's the best way to explain it.
Okay, thank you, huh?
Yep.
It's not standards like.
Just because somebody will ask and it's like,
But we're gonna look at it.
okay,
762 PUD standards. B, affordable housing. 2A, a minimum of 10% of housing units shall be restricted. I was just confused by these numbers in red. It like what it was and what it changed to.
I'm pulling mine up, so just give me a second.
It looks like it was 25% and you inserted 10 between the 2 and 5, so it's a little confusing.
200.
Yeah.
Well, the 25 is red too, so I was
But
like,
it's got crust in it. It's got.
So it's a minute with, I believe, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, definitely didn't put it in a good spot. It was 25%. We drafted 25% and then it was requested that we reduce it to 10%. So we had 25 and then we, per request, I believe of the commissioners, and I apologize if I'm incorrect on that, that it was requested we go down to 10%. So hence why there's two numbers and I probably shouldn't have split it in the middle.
that's okay. And before that, we had nothing.
That's correct.
That's right.
Correct. This was at a request that we add a little bit of housing and electric or try and be more energy efficient. So we also added that installation of electric vehicle spaces. And
And
also,
then, and
This
then
is what
D,
you would call inclusionary zone.
D is there's a note for, it goes from 100 to 120.
correct. Same thing. We had drafted 120 and then heard feedback we had drafted 100 and then heard feedback to go to 120. Correct, and someone in the room may remember this better about why. If I feel like it was already 120 somewhere else maybe, and that's why we were going with it. Or else I'll think a little bit more on why it's.
Yeah, the intent of this section was to memorialize what the town has been negotiating, if you will, as part of PUDs recently. So like Cora Street, Lemon Street comments are it's the kind of the standard language that the town has been using for percentage and things. And that's where like 25% might be an industry standard, but the town has been using 10%. So again, it's just a way for the PUDs to up the bar a little bit more. And we believe that this is consistent with what the town has implemented through PUDs in recent years.
Thank you.
I'm still open to discussion on this. I think if anybody feels like it should be more than 10%, now is the time
oh, yeah.
to say that.
This is Pam. So part of my background is I moved to Steamboat in 1975. And I've lived in Steamboat, Park City, around Snowbird, Jackson Hole, spent a fair bit of time in Aspen. And I can tell you that I don't have the data, but I bet more than half of those towns have increased that number to 25% over time. And the problem is if we don't do it now, the reason they had to ratchet it up is because they started low thinking, oh, well, we'll be okay with 10%. And then they get to a point in growth where they're like, holy cow, 10% isn't coming close to meeting our needs. So I would encourage a much higher number. Now, if somebody asked it to be lower, I'd love to know why. So I take that into thought also.
I can weigh in to say that over the years, we've had numerous discussions about inclusionary zoning. And there's a school of thought, I can even find an article that I saved about it. That said, if you don't have inclusionary zoning, it's sort of like that. I compare it to, we found at the Sherburne that if you make your door entry fee by donation only, people tend to put in $20 bills into the donation jar. But if you say it's $10, they'll pay $10. It's like if you leave it open, you can potentially get more. That hasn't been,
I think those days are
That's-
over.
that's not. the
That
way
doesn't
it's
work in
worked.
housing.
But that's the argument, is that
Oh.
if you go without inclusionary zoning, and that, in my view, from my experience in the last 20+ years here, on town council, is that if we don't have inclusionary zoning, we got to be a lot more aggressive about how we negotiate for it, because we haven't been aggressive. So I guess what I'm saying is, I would probably agree with a higher inclusionary zoning number, unless we're willing to build some things into the code that give us the ability to be more aggressive in negotiating for higher number.
I just
That
think-
hasn't worked in the past.
And I just think if the number's low, people will go for the bare minimum and feel no obligation to go any
But
more.
we haven't had any number, that's what I. keep in
Yes.
mind, so that's,
I'm just saying,
Right.
historically, I've seen the many towns like us.
Yeah.
Eventually get there and by the time they get there, it's too late.
I mean, I'd like to weigh in on this. I think, we speak a little bit to this in the bonus density. Kind of speaks to this a little bit, but I think we should have a 10% minimum, but if we're going to increase it, I think we should incentivize the increase. Say that, especially in today's market, I'd hate to. I want to create as much housing as we can, so, and I don't want to discourage it. So if they have a minimum of 10, if they go to 15, they get a bonus. If they go to 20, they get a bonus. If they go to 25, they get a bigger bonus. So I don't know what those bonuses are.
Like a gift or something.
What, free chocolates, hot chocolate, president's office.
well, I mean,
Marshmallows?
Yes, I mean, some type of incentive, I think, and I don't know what that is. I don't have the thought, but I don't think people are. I think with the Telluride Foundation and what's going on in our community and affordable housing, there's a lot more opportunity than when I did it 20 years ago. So now there's ways to do it that didn't exist 5 years ago. And I think it's easier to make it happen today than it's ever been in Ridgway.
I
Well,
think the minimum number should be higher, and then beyond that, we can incentivize.
I agree.
and another point to make, I think, is something we discussed at our workshop last week before, about how to raise funds for workforce housing. And the point being made was that in the cases where we've gotten affordable housing units recently, because of the cost of materials, the cost of construction, we're getting affordable housing units that are $500,000, $700,000. You know, it's like they're not really affordable.
I think it's
So what we talked about last week or so was, how about give them an opportunity to just pay some money into a fund that we use to put affordable housing in on property that we bought and actually do. I mean, I think that I've been saying for a couple of years now that the idea of market rate affordable housing is gone. It's just, that's no longer. even
That was part of
possible.
the Telluride Developer Mitigation Plan. There were 3 options. You could provide affordable housing on site. You could purchase affordable housing off-site and deed restrict it. So you're buying something and then taking a loss, or you could put money into a fund. There were 3 options.
I think there's something we're missing that John and I have talked about at length. I think you should be able to donate land. I think the donation of, I mean, for a developer to build deed restricted housing is awkward, and to be polite. And our experience, like in River Park and Parkside, never gets built. It always at the last of the bottom of the list. And if the developer was to give, for the sake of an example, 1 acre of land to the town to fulfill that requirement, I think that's the best of all worlds, because then the town can leverage that with DOLA and other grants to build exactly that and get housing below market cost.
Yeah, I mean, it's the town really, we've always said, we don't want to be in the business of being a developer. That's
Well,
probably.
you can hire a developer. I mean, you don't, I mean, if you have the land,
And I mean, it just points out how complicated the whole thing is. That the biggest stumbling block right now is the cost of land, right? The second biggest is cost of building. So I hear what you're saying. It's just like, it points out the need for, you know, whether it's a home trust or what, that we needed some sort of affordable housing. What do you call it?
Well, and that would be a couple of years down the road as opposed to the builder
Yeah,
who's
I was
already
gonna-
building.
That,
That would be a couple year, at least a couple years down the road, as opposed to the builder who's already currently building.
What I've seen is when the builder just has to dole out cash, that's easy for them. And then they can build the highest cost housing they want, which continues to drive up the cost of housing in town in general. And then they're building things that aren't necessarily part of the community. So if they want to build $1 million homes, they'll just write you a check and say, here you go. But we're going to build $1 million homes. It still doesn't solve the problem
interesting.
because they can afford to pay the fee. To them, it's just writing a check, but it doesn't contribute to the solution of our problem.
The thing, so then the thing that I don't understand how we figure out, and Katie and TJ, forgive us if we're getting off the rails here, but I think this is an important discussion. Like, for example, the Riverfront Village, I think their affordable housing units are gonna be like 700 or something
Yeah.
ridiculous.
That's not.
But that's because somewhere in our code, we've got it written in that it has to be some percentage of their cost. Well, how do we make it so that it doesn't matter what it costs them to build it, it's gotta be X percent of AMI qualified.
And that's
You know,
why I
so that they
think,
actually are losing money. We're making it, can build affordable housing units and still make money on just less money.
and that's why I want to force them to build them.
So I think we need to do that, but at the same time, we need to somehow change the way our code's written now, and I don't.
Yeah, because the Lena Street condos, same thing.
Yeah, make
They're
it so
supposed
that
to
they're
be
not, they're
affordable
actually
units in
losing
there.
money on it. They're, they build them and they can't be cost more than this.
Yeah.
Is that possible? Can we do that?
We can certainly look at that and understand what the deed restriction provisions are in other communities. I mean, that's always my go-to. You certainly want to see what's out
Compare
there.
what's going on in the market, right?
Right, and so, yeah, we can certainly do that.
What's that?
I said,
TJ,
"Way off
Katie,
the
any
bat."
thoughts on that aspect? You know, being
Yeah, it's definitely normal for communities to refer to a sheet that either the Regional Housing Authority or the jurisdiction itself has, and they usually reflect those based on housing and urban development numbers that are released usually around March each year, and they'll amend that sheet each year, and it will say how many bedrooms you have, what percent AMI, and what you can rent or sell that unit for. So you kind of find those thresholds. First of all, you're gonna need to determine what percent AMI you want, and also consider flexibility based on family size, which is usually connected to bedroom size. So I think TJ and I both have a lot of background with that, and working with a lot of communities, we can offer insight on when you get to those discussions, and we'd be happy to. I don't know, part of me wants to say, can we bring it back into the section we're working on and put that off for housing discussion later, or I'll let you guys decide. So
That's okay. We can do that.
definitely your call. I'm happy to keep listening, and I'm sure TJ can weigh in also on more housing, affordable housing from his background too. But we both have some experience in it and working with it for some communities.
I would just like to add that I know town council has put aside money towards affordable housing, and these are all things we need to address sooner than later, because I think we're off the back on these things.
So I do think that we can, I think that the larger discussion of how we define what the final workforce housing should cost is up for discussion, but are we willing to reconsider this number that they have penciled in at 25, and apparently our last discussion, we said, let's make it 10. Do we want to make it 25 or bump it back to 25? I know Pam has advocated for that, and I think I would probably agree with at least 20, if not 25.
Yeah, and I'd be fine with 20.
What's everybody thinking?
I think we bring it up because it's ultimately town council's decision, but we're making a recommendation,
So,
right?
but that's what I'm saying is, I think, and
I think anything less than 20 is inadequate.
I'll agree with
I
that.
would agree.
I
So,
agree.
Russ?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I think we need to address how that actually gets implemented, but as discussed, that was probably more of a later topic. I have no problem with 20 to 25.
Okay, so what do we want to tell these guys to change it to? 25?
Yeah, why not?
I like 25.
Okay, Megan.
If I may put it into just a little bit more context, that where we're talking about right now, I believe, is the PUD section.
Correct.
And so if you think about it, the PUD, this is also a brand new approach to the PUD for the town. So what we're doing is we've now moved the PUD to a zoning component only, subdivision separate, and really it's going to be these parcels that are going to have some uniqueness to them, and there's going to be a negotiation. So I would suggest that when we think, if we can think down the road of when we have the affordable housing section implemented and this working and we're kicking on all cylinders, this section should be more stringent than the straight affordable housing section, because in what this is saying is that if you want to deviate from the standard code requirements, you're going to have to give some extra stuff. And therefore, one of those that I'm hearing loud and clear, and I think is across the board, that affordable housing is key. So in order to do a PUD, you're going to have to raise to a higher level of standard for affordable housing. So I might, again, I think we're in kind of a unique area market-wise. I would suggest if you're jumping between 20, 25, easily go with 25, maybe even higher, because really you want to decentivize PUDs, right? And so if you think about it, if you're thinking 20%, then maybe it's 10% higher is a PUD. I'm just kind of throwing numbers around, but I want to put that into context of how this would be implemented compared to the rest of the sections.
Thanks, TJ. That's really interesting. I mean, there's parts of this whole exercise that have been fascinating to me because I had no idea with my history here that you could even consider de-incentivizing PUDs, because so much of what we've done has been PUDs. I really like the idea. My mind's kind of blown here.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
Montrose just rewrote its whole PUD process to make it easier to amend. They've had a disaster with it. So PUDs are inherent nightmares, my 50 years experience. So
Interesting.
I
Well,
just never heard that before.
So now we're at least
It's-
25.
take 67% to bring it to
I
amend.
thought he was gonna go the other way. He was gonna say, whoa, you guys are getting crazy here.
Montrose just made it significantly easier to amend the PUD because they've been so much trouble.
All
And
right,
I would say that what's in front of you all this evening is a lot simpler from a PUD standpoint. I would also say that based on my experiences in town, PUDs are used more for subdivision processing than it is what the PUD should really be used for, incentivizing unique development, if you will. And that's one of the reasons for separating them out. So you want to decentivize, right? What you do is you create zoning districts that allow a good mix of everything. And I think you guys have a really good mix of zone districts, and you really want to encourage people to use those zone districts. You have HB, historic business, that allows a mix of uses that are commercial focused. You have MR, which is mixed use residential, that encourages a mix of uses that are residential focused. So really you have enough tools in your toolkit where straight zoning should be perfectly legit and fine across most boards. The PUD is going to be the one-off, either because somebody wants to come in and do something really cool, or because there's a really, you're getting to the point where the lots that are available create some difficulty in meeting straight zoning. And so it is an opportunity to to push the priorities of the town. And I feel that affordable housing is a component there. So I guess I'll get off my little soapbox on it, but what I'm hearing and I think is clear. Let's go with 25%. The other part is that through the affordable housing conversations, this PUD section, or this section of the PUD, requirements should also be updated and ratcheted up appropriately for whatever reason. So maybe, you know, to your point, maybe the tools in the toolbox for straight the affordable housing component allows fee in lieu. But if you want to do a PUD, that's not an option that's on the table anymore. Right. So there's just a lot of different things to consider. But we want to try to get something in here for the PUD. And it sounds like 25% is a really good starting point.
And let's start there. And then when it's presented to council, point it out and ask them if they want to up it. They'll have that option, right?
Yep. I think it'd be really helpful when we get to the point when you are presenting this to council that,
Me?
no, I'm talking to Katie and,
Oh, I was like, shit, I didn't know how to do it.
no, I'm
There you
talking,
go.
Surprise.
We're gonna assign each one of you a section and have you present a section each.
no, what I was getting at, or trying to get to, was the idea that not only would I like you to help us, the planning commission present this to council, but actually do it in a way where you can provide some larger background of your thinking like this. I mean, I know for me, and probably for some of the rest of council, this idea that the PUD is something that we shouldn't be encouraging, we should actually be disincentivizing it, is a whole new concept for a lot of us.
Yeah, I'd love to learn what is
What is kind of the current thinking around
about,
stuff?
yeah.
So
Only this is the venue, but there's a lot of talk about that.
Maybe we have a training session with TJ and Katie and we talk about current trends and what we should be looking at.
Now you're getting me going. Let's do it.
Okay, I like I want to learn,
Right?
I want to learn more.
Preston,
I'm trying to think, it's so interesting because when
can we do that?
I need all the training I can get.
Have like a training session with these guys and get up to date on current planning trends and what's happening. And, you know, it could be part of our section 9 suggestions, like
Absolutely,
what
yeah,
should
we
we,
can add that to the list and,
yeah.
you know, schedule that when the right time comes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I was remembering that number of, well, back when we did the 2019 land use master plan update, Clarion, the contractor we hired to do it, they're very well respected in the planning world. And there was a lot of talk about trying to remember what they call it, the smart codes, basically, where your code is all designed around looking at each individual piece of property on its own merits, because everything is different. Every lot has its own unique set of assets and liabilities. And I've always been tempted by that idea, but we keep sticking to this slightly more conventional planning and zoning code. But it sounds like what you guys are experiencing in the planning world these days is kind of like an updated version of the smart code combined with sort of the old way we used to do it. And I think we could all benefit from learning more about that.
I think I want to chime in here. So this is what I've seen, what I've observed about Ridgway. Ridgway really has no residential zoning available currently in the marketplace. And what you're seeing is these developers buying GC because it's a conditional use, and they're buying general commercial for residential uses. And there's no 4-acre piece or 5-acre piece or like the Wolf property that somebody can buy as residential. I think the town and this board specifically should say, this is what we want residential. This is what we want commercial. This is what we want apartments, and then let the market take that, for instance, instead of changing zoning and let them tell us what they want.
And theoretically, we have that. You know, our future land use map is supposed to be that. You may not.
Well, I understand if you're going to, trust me, no heart, but there's no residential land available development. It's all, the
The
only
key
thing,
word there is available. Plenty of land is just not available.
none of it's annexed and zoned. There's
No, I mean,
none.
there's actually, well, a lot of it is smaller lots. You're talking about a big,
I'm talking about somebody that built 20 homes.
right? I mean, anyway.
What about out there, the property you just sold?
That's the only one that's what sold.
Anyways, back to what we're doing here. I have reached the end of my notes and questions, other than some silly little edits. And so I'd like to see if anyone else had any other questions for TJ and Katie directly related to this, what the hell ever we're working on, chapter 7. A hand up?
Yes.
We can
I
take a-
do. I had one other thing to bring up with the ADUs. So we had the affordable housing section 7-7-1. 1 and 2, 1 states that ADUs can be buildable up to 900 square feet. And I think that was brought up earlier that you were going to change that to 800. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And I've
And
got
then-
it on my list.
But then on number 2, it says that, and I thought that was our regulation now, is that ADUs aren't supposed to be used for short-term rentals. But if you go to 7.4.6, it talks about ADUs being short-term rentals. So is there a change? Has there been a change to the short-term rentals where they can be used as short-term now?
That's a good question. Currently, there are provisions in the code that allow for an ADU to be short-term rented, but you have to meet the specific criteria. So you asked a really good question about how this is drafted, and this will be, I think, a philosophical question for you all. But Katie and TJ have to provide some context about that section A there.
Can I just weigh in for a second, just from a historical standpoint here? I've always been uncomfortable with the way our last edits to the ADU code ended up, because I definitely believe that ADUs, in the strict sense of what I think an ADU is, should not be allowed to be short-term rented.
I agree.
The way it's written now is that it's basically calling an ADU a unit that has been built on a property that it would. Well, let me say it in a separate way. ADUs were designed in my historical recollection as a way to put another unit on a parcel that wouldn't otherwise qualify to have another unit. It wasn't big enough, and it also allowed it to be done without an additional water and sewer tap fee. So the classic example is in the old part of town where we've got our platted lots and blocks. Typical building site until recently was two lots, 7,100 square yes, roughly 7,100 square feet. And that wouldn't qualify. That's not big enough for a second unit. But an ADU could be built on that parcel, and it wouldn't require a separate water and sewer tap, and it would be a way to incentivize some workforce housing, some mother-in-law units, that kind of thing. What the code now says is that it calls a unit built on a bigger parcel that would otherwise allow either a duplex or two separate units to be called an ADU, but to also be short-term rented. I think we need to somehow change the way the code's written so that it doesn't refer to those units as ADUs. They're just units, and an ADU cannot be short-term rented. And an ADU is only one of these units that's on a lot that wouldn't otherwise qualify. Now, it probably is more complicated now that we basically cut the minimum lot size in half and allow single-family homes on one residential lot now. That changed the whole picture in town, density-wise.
There could still be a minimum for an to allow an ADU, where it couldn't be allowed in one of those single lots, right?
I agree.
I don't think it is allowed.
I agree 100% on this. I don't think ADU should be rented, short-term rented at all, period.
And it's a lot of it is semantics and terminology and labels. So Preston or
Yeah,
TJ or Katie,
it's
I
a
don't
great
know.
conversation. I see where you're going. I think my head goes to the primary issue of you can't have more than one primary structure on any given lot. Anything else on a lot, and that would be subsequent to a primary dwelling unit or whatever the structure may be, is an accessory, right? In the way you described it, you'd have, in the way I thought you described it, you'd have a couple different units, right? Which I think just goes against how the code is written currently. TJ, Katie,
No,
weigh in.
I think you misheard me. I mean, I wouldn't, it's one additional unit. Your point's really well taken in that it's an accessory to the primary use. As opposed to like a duplex or a parcel, like in the old days, it would have taken 3 town lots in the old part of town to build either a duplex or 2 separate units. And I'm not even sure 2 separate units. I think 2 separate units would have, in the old days, would have required 4 lots. You could build a duplex on 3.
Square foot.
Yeah.
The square foot, there's not lot minimum. So if you had a corner lot a little bit bigger, you could.
Yeah, and it, again, everything's changed now that we allow basically twice the density that we used to allow.
Well, now it's based on the dimensional requirement, the dimensional standards that we had in place.
Right.
So,
Right.
I think what you just said is now that we allow twice the density we used to have, we need to revisit the ADU.
I think we might need to. I think we need to make sure that ADUs are literally accessory dwelling units. And if they are accessory dwelling units, accessory to the primary residence on the property, and they really should only go in the residential zones, right? And that they should not be allowed to be short-term rentals. If they are literally ADUs. Like, I see TJ smirking a little there. You have a different opinion, or is this just a really familiar quagmire?
Well, no, it's all the above, and it's actually really interesting that I think specific to, and maybe where it even gets more convoluted in Ridgway, is that Preston and I were speaking with a potential real estate buyer, where there's a plat that calls that a plat note limits ADUs, and I don't remember the exact detail of it, but once Preston and I kind of dug around to look at it, we realized that plat note was placed on before the town had ADU requirements. And now that the town has a definition for ADUs, that plat note makes no sense and is really confusing. And I'm just using that as an example of, I think what I'm realizing is that Ridgway historically has really taken a great proactive approach to these issues. The downside of that is that they made, I think there are some, I'll call it knee-jerk. I don't think it is. I think every decision that the town has made has been well thought out, but it's basically has turned into planning by plat note or zoning by plat note. And those start, as you get more of those, we ran into it. Ran into it in a subdivision 2 not too long ago, HOA that doesn't allow ADUs, but it was conflicted, right? So over time, the definitions have changed. The terms and the uses of those words have changed. And now there's a conflict between what was originally intended and what the code says. And I don't know that that's necessarily the issue, but I think what it is that the connotation of ADU has changed. And so we have an opportunity to just clarify it in the code, at least, to be exactly what you're saying, John. I think, yes, ADUs need to be explicitly accessory to, and the purpose of those ADUs should be for an affordable housing component. It's not for somebody to have a business venture.
Well, TJ, I remember during the discussion on this that there was some public comment that if a local person rented here and they could short-term rent their ADU, it would help them afford to be here. And that was how that happened, the way, if my memory serves me right. And it was an opportunity for a local to make a little extra money, but they had to be a primary resident in the main structure. And I think that's the way it evolved, but John has a better memory than I do.
But I also had a question of, did we get rid of the limitations on how many short-term rentals there is in Ridgway?
No.
No, that's still in the code.
Yep.
Yeah, that's in what, chapter 5? It's under the
Okay.
business licenses.
Okay.
Is that correct, Preston?
I believe so. I feel like you made up the number, but.
Well, and
It's
this
not
is,
business licenses that limits the number of licenses that the town will
Okay.
issue.
and somewhat related to that, the definition of a short-term rental uses the word housing. And it's semantics, but it doesn't say like how many days. So we have a differentiated number of days for occupancy for short-term rental versus local workforce rental housing. So it's a semantics thing, but I don't know that we want to call a short-term rental housing. Lodging maybe, but if we're trying to separate the two, we need to speak of them differently.
That's an interesting point.
I agree.
Yeah, and I've brought this up before, but I brought up the point about this adding the short-term rental part on the ADU, and I think that's wrong at the end of the day. If it's an ADU and we're actually going to incentivize it by not having to pay that additional 30% for a water connection, it's part of your typical water connection, that should be set strictly for an ADU to incentivize it and not something that applies to a short-term rental. And so even though it's put in there that way, like I said in my initial comment on it, it's confusing. It makes it sound like you can do this, but you can change your mind later, or maybe not pay the incentive and say, oh, it's an ADU, and then set it up as a short-term rental. So some better definition and clarity on that needs to be set up. And I think pulling that, leaving the incentivization of not having to pay for additional water line costs needs to be specific to the ADU.
I agree.
I agree. And then I had one more comment with that section, the noise ordinance 7-4-5. And it talks about construction work between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Did that, and this is probably a question for Preston, did that used to be 7 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Has that changed?
I don't think so.
I don't believe so.
No, that's always been like that.
That's my recollection.
Okay,
It doesn't have you're not allowed to have it on Sunday, I believe. Is that the way it reads? Because you can't do 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week.
Yeah, it's Monday through Friday. I thought.
I thought it was including Saturday, but I don't remember.
I had a couple, so I'm getting oriented here. So we're just working on section 7, yes?
Yes.
Chapter 7, yes.
Okay,
correct.
so chapter
Chapter
7.
7.
785 D11, a qualified water engineer. Doesn't it have to be a licensed engineer? And then the same thing for attorney, doesn't it have to be licensed in the state of Colorado?
For engineers, yes, they need to be
Licensed.
properly licensed and
Well, it just says.
regulated by or not regulated, but registered with the Department of Regulatory Agencies.
Yeah. So it just says qualified.
Yeah.
Should just say licensed.
It should just say licensed in, and then I wondered about the same thing about attorney. Do they have to practice, do they have to be licensed in Colorado to practice here?
No.
No?
So they have reciprocity.
Reciprocity,
But they have to apply for it. I don't think it's just given them.
okay. Because I know that, if somebody's doing a development or whatever, they'll bring an attorney that they use back home, whatever. Or wherever they're from.
That's a good question.
I think it should say state, though. I think we don't need any Dallas attorneys helping us develop it.
Okay. And then just for my learning curve, 785 annexation. So if a developer or a property owner wants to have their property annexed to the town, they have to bring water rights with them?
Mhm.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood
If,
that.
if
correctly.
they have, if they have, them, they might not have water rights. They're not required to go out and buy water rights, just if they have them.
Yeah,
Oh, doesn't it say must?
But I think the implication is that,
I read that as pretty fuzzy. I read that same
Oh.
thing as fuzzy.
Okay.
I mean,
read it
I'm
as-
just pointing out that you could annex a piece of ground that didn't have any water rights.
Right.
That wouldn't mean that they'd have to go out and find some different water rights to buy.
Well,
At least that's not typical. Maybe that.
I believe it
I
reads
just
they
said-
must bring water rights.
Yes.
And if they don't have it, it's not.
Was that
Give us what they
intent?
have. I believe
785,
it reads they must bring. Because I saw that.
Which
I-
subsection?
I'm sorry, that's all I wrote.
785, it says annexation procedures underneath annexation.
No, I get that, but it's a lengthy section with the procedures set forth, so I'm just curious about, I see.
I think it might be under D11 from my quick skim so far here.
It's under
I'm learning to, I'll learn to
Seven-
take better notes.
783F, adequate water rights are to be deeded to the town as determined necessary by the town at the time of annexation.
D11
That
says water
certainly-
rights.
That certainly implies
Yeah,
adequate water rights for what? For what they want to do?
yeah, I mean, I thought it was, if you happen to give them to us, if you don't have them, you can still come in. But I think it reads.
That
we have to-
historically has been,
Yeah. I think it's real fuzzy.
If maybe I'll add context and if this context makes some sense, we can clarify it. I'm definitely understanding and seeing the confusion, but in theory, the concept is that if you annex to the town, whatever property is, you dedicate all of your water to the town because now you're an urban development or urbanized property. Whereas if you're in the county, larger, you might be ranching, so you're using your water for ag. So that's the concept. So the concept is upon annexation, you dedicate all of your water and also sever all your mineral rights. So that doesn't happen, right? Those are general concepts for annexation. The adequacy of water and the supply for the development, the proposed development, occurs at the time of subdivision. So there are two separate things. There's one, the dedication of the water that's with the land to the town that happens on annexation, and then the confirmation that there's adequate water for the proposed development, and that happens at time of subdivision. Now that's the black and white. The more gray area is that the annexation agreement spells out what area, what amount of water could be allocated to future development for this project, for that land. So I think we can probably clarify that, and we'll have to get with Bo. This was a compilation of a lot of different regulations, so that's why they're probably seeing some ambiguity in there, and making sure that we're covering the bases. But I think that's the concept, that upon annexation, all water tied to that project, that's the starting point, be dedicated to the town to be for town supply.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need to look at that because say the wolf tract, which is 72 acres, and they just want to annex 20 acres, we're requiring to give all the water rights and they won't do that. I mean, so, and it should be proportionate to what's being donated or the Ingos. If the Ingos donated annex part of their property and they have huge water rights on 100 acres and they only want to annex 5 acres.
they wouldn't have to dedicate all their water rights. They would just have to dedicate the water rights that are.
I think it needs to be clear at that.
I mean, that should be the intent. It's totally reasonable to expect them to give. all-
Well, I think that's the intent, but it needs to be clear.
Well, and-
Because otherwise it's prohibitive. Because I don't think, I don't, Ingo or anybody, like, for instance, the Percheron property east of Ridgway, USA, where Kuno's gonna get his road to Vista Terrace. They might only come in with part of their property.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's.
I
ever-
think these guys here,
historically-
we can clarify
Yeah,
that, right?
historically, annexations don't. Somebody wants to annex 10 acres of a 100-acre parcel. You don't have to give all the water on that 100.
That's good. Glad to hear that.
So we'll work with Bo and get that clarified. TJ Katie, just a small note that subsection 11 that does say water rights, that first sentence, I've read it 4 times and I'm pretty sure it's not a complete sentence. So
Read it one more time. It'll make sense the next one.
so that probably means that I wrote it. That's probably what it means. Anyway, that's.
No, full disclosure, I did the annexation section, so that's all me.
I would say that the most problematic part of this is 7-8-3F, where it says adequate water rights are to be deeded to the town as determined necessary by the town at the time of annexation to provide sufficient water for the annexed property and the uses thereon. So that implies that whether they have water rights or not, if they want to be annexed, they got to provide adequate water rights for the uses that they propose thereon, which is pretty unusual.
But if it says water rights of the property,
It doesn't say of the property. It just says adequate water rights are to be deeded to the town.
So we've
that-
identified that this needs to be cleaned
That's
up.
I think that's the one that needs the most
Okay.
attention, but the whole thing needs certainly to be run by the attorneys for sure.
Yeah, and I was following what you were reading, but I didn't read it on here. It seems like it affords for that flexibility in negotiation too, so, that's an important piece. But we will follow up on it.
Well, since Ridgway has so rarely annexed property, I think it's important for everyone to understand that annexation, as it states elsewhere in here, it puts the town in the driver's seat to every extent.
I think that's pretty clear in here.
Yeah.
It's like, if you should dare come forward for this section, we wish you the best of luck.
I think the town's right there, but I think that's all going to change. I mean, I think,
It could.
I mean, there's no land to develop in Ridgway. Ridgway's going to grow, is going to be.
Well, that's a big argument. We are getting a bottle of scotch and discuss that later.
Well, yeah, I guess I don't know the build out, what our current build out is, that would make a big, yeah, we need some scotch anyway.
Anything else?
Jeff?
Yeah, I got a few.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
Listening.
looking at table 4.3. And I'm looking at food and beverage, microbrewery and distillery, and I'm trying to understand the difference between that and the brewery under manufacturing production. Because they're okay in different areas. And so what
Which section is that in, Russ? Is that section 4?
Yeah, he's looking in section 4, the land use table. And then I'll read through a little bit from 9, which has the definitions in it. Before I get into the definitions themselves, what I'll explain is that a lot of communities start by just allowing a brewery, not distinguishing between them. And then what it has led to is all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of grain stockpiled outside and a whole bunch of outdoor storage, or you have smells coming out of it.
Or you have deer on the street eating it.
Or that. So it makes more sense to break them down into basically how much you're producing and what the effects of that production is on the surrounding properties. So that's where that distinguishing factor comes in. And what we tried to do was capture it through definition, so someone could be really figure out if they were a brew pub or a brewery. But essentially a brewery is more of the industrial use. And then TJ, you want to weigh? I think TJ, if I didn't cover it enough, feel free to weigh in a little bit more on that. That's the basics. So.
okay, I guess the key thing I'm trying to do is make sure that we're not outlawing the Colorado boy here, okay? Because if we look at strictly the microbrewery under manufacturing, it's in the wrong area. Because it's in a historic business area. So that was my key concern with that particular one.
Maybe.
There is another one here that actually had the sale of building materials. And here it is, under retail, building supplies and material sales. And so currently our true value hardware is not legal under that definition, as it's in the historic business. So that's another one that I saw that I had some questions and concerns on.
Pause there because I didn't catch up to right yet.
Okay.
Sorry, and I don't want to lose track of these.
No.
So was the first one, the microbrewery, any of that need to get changed or discussed?
Well, I guess the question is it looked like if it was classified as a microbrewery distillery under food and beverages, it's okay. But if our Colorado boy is classified as a brewery under manufacturing and production, it's in the wrong part of town. So again, I'm not sure between the definitions you gave me, I got enough clarity to know. And I guess I'm just trying to make sure that an established business, we're not going to tell them they have to shut down.
Yeah.
Is there a definition difference between brewery and microbrewery? Because that's the only distinction I see.
So if
Yeah,
you-
it has to do with basically, I think the number of barrels that are brewed.
Yeah, so as long as they're a microbrewery, they're fine. If they're a brewery, they need to be in LI or GI.
Correct. And so probably what I can do, maybe Preston or somebody, maybe they can get us in touch with the Colorado boy, and we can kind of talk through the definitions, see where they fall, and then change the definitions to meet their needs.
Right.
Okay.
So
Well-
and Rust, the annex with its larger capacity is in the right place. And the Colorado original with just its one tank is probably, it might have two tanks on. Anyway, I think we need to look at the numbers and make sure we're okay on that.
Yeah, and then just to give a little bit more background on that, it's those definitions come from the state liquor licensing, I think. So they have to do more with what their state licenses are than local. So it should be in line. But we certainly want to double check and make sure.
That makes
It is
sense.
not the intent to outlaw or make something non-conforming.
Gotcha.
So the definition of brew pub doesn't work because it does allow for microbrewery in the,
Under food and beverage.
well, I'm looking at the definition of brew pub.
Oh, you're in definitions.
Yeah, and that's part of it too, because again, it depends on their liquor license. The idea between a microbrewery and a brewery, or that your license through the state is to basically manufacture alcohol, as opposed to a brew pub, that's a different type of a liquor license that has to do with consumption on site, right? And percentage of barreling and bottling and distribution. And I'm getting outside of my area of expertise, but we tried to set these up to be more aligned with the licenses that these industries are getting from the state, so that we don't have to run into that issue. So in theory, they may fall under a brew pub, simply because they're manufacturing and consuming on site with food, with a kitchen. And it's not just a manufacturing or production component.
Yeah,
But
you make
we can look into that.
We'll look into that more. You make a great point, TJ, getting into the liquor licensing aspect. The other piece, don't worry too much. No one is going to get outlawed as a result of these code changes. We could talk at length about the legally non-conforming aspect of anything existing prior to enaction of code updates, stuff like that. TJ and Katie know much more about that, or can speak more eloquently to that than I can, but point well taken. Good catch, Russ.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. And then your next one was retail material sales. Was that correct?
Yeah, it was building supplies and material sales. Our current hardware store is in the historic business area, and that's not referenced here at all.
Okay. Is in general that a use that you as a town think should be in HB?
I don't.
The hardware, what's the challenge here, if you guys aren't aware, is that, the hardware store's been there forever. And as a retail outlet, conventional hardware store, I don't see that that's a problem. What's the potential issue is the, quarter block on the other side of the alley to the east behind, Cimarron Coffee that they also own, and they got permission to build a warehouse on there. And they store building materials and sacks of concrete and stuff like that there. There was some pushback when that was approved. Because some people said that's not the right place for it. I believe the planning commission's opinion at the time was it's pertinent to the hardware store. It may not be the right place for it right now, but it makes sense based on what's on the ground. So we've sort of created a bit of a monster there.
Well, then there's that whole junkie lot that they've got filled next to that shed.
Well, it's all one lot. It's a quarter block that's all theirs. And it's, some of it's firewood and other.
I don't think it's an appropriate use there for a conventional lumber yard. I think I'm comfortable with the way that the hardware store is using it, but if somebody, if Home Depot was to come in and try to put a lumber yard in, it would be inappropriate in that zone, in my opinion.
So it sounds like we're okay to keep it as it is in the code, knowing that who's there is obviously allowed to continue to remain there. But maybe not have it be allowed for future potential uses in the HB district.
Does that make sense to you, Russ? It's basically, what we're basically saying is we're kind of grandfathering it.
That works. That works. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with grandfathering it, and also the lumber is not the bulk of the business, is it?
No,
Okay, so, we could, if we have to refine that definition further, we could do something like that if we have to.
Possibly, yeah.
most people aren't buying lumber there.
No, I'm going in for fixing my faucet and whatever.
I'm guessing that at some point that just the property value situation and all is going to make it so that that quarter block is going to be worth a whole lot more for something else. And
It already is, it just hasn't come out.
yeah. Don't forget you got Jennifer with her hand up there.
I think
Okay,
Russ might have a few more.
I do have a few more indeed.
Okay.
Jennifer Cram, thanks for being patient. We'll get to you. Go ahead, Russ.
I am kind of surprised that the only place we can have an arts and crafts studio is in the historic business area. And I'm guessing that doesn't really apply in our current town.
That was carried over from the only place it's allowed right now. Correct.
Is that right, guys? The rest of the commission?
yeah, we don't need any more stinking art in this town.
We don't want any hippies.
Okay, we must be getting late. It's not that late. Come on. No, I think you're right, Russ. I think that's a good catch. It should certainly be in GC. I can't imagine. I don't really recall why it wouldn't be. I don't remember that we had arts and crafts studio as a specific use that ever came up that I can. No, I think that's a good catch.
So we can add it to general commercial. Do you want it by right or by conditional use?
I don't know why
By right?
it would be by right.
I think by right, that's fine. We encourage them.
Anywhere else? I mean, it's
The
actually,
whole downtown or a creative district.
I think it could be in, is there a definition here for arts and crafts studio?
I
It shouldn't be a residential unless it's a home business.
No, it shouldn't be in residential, but I could see it being in both LI and GI for some, like,
LIGI and HB, GC.
Art and entertainment center indoor structure,
That's more performing arts, I think.
but it includes and studios for arts education, such as dance or painting.
you're reading the arts and crafts studio definition.
Art and entertainment center indoor definition.
Huh.
This one was school, I think.
So yeah, that's a great catch, that last line in there too. So art and craft studio is currently defined in the code, and we left the definition as is, which is the workshop of an artist, sculptor, photographer, furniture maker, etc. It can involve the use of hand tools and small scale equipment and include an accessory gallery. The primary use is the retail sale of custom goods as produced on site. I skimmed that. a
So
little
funny
bit.
that that's only in HB as a use by right. That's really interesting.
Yep, and so that, and I just did a quick scan the existing code for craft, and it definitely is the only place that's allowed right now. Happy to, if the town wants it, to put it in that land use table other places, but
I mean, I think it should be used by right in GC and possibly in at least LI.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it should be everywhere but residential.
Unless it's a home occupation.
Right, but then it fits on that.
So I agree that this is a good, this is somewhat of a simple, I just want to remind everybody of the slippery slope that we could get on while we start looking at uses in zone districts. And it's kind of this rabbit hole and this never ending spiral. So again, I think we're trying to get everything brought over from the current into the new format. And if there are simple things like that we can just update that make perfect sense, like this one. Makes perfect sense to put arts and craft studio in the GC and the light industrial I1 district. I just want to remind everyone that could be a slippery slope.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the only other, I did have just a clarification question. I was looking at I think it's manufacturing, and I was curious what actually qualifies as heavy manufacturing? And seeing if that's actually something we want in GC as well as GI.
yeah, let me find the definition. Happy to take comments on this. And even if you want to read this, all of you, after the definition's a little better, I'm kind of guessing that may have been the part that people probably put to the end and may not have even gotten to.
I did not get there, I'll
No,
admit that.
that's totally okay. And it's good you're asking these little questions because we do want you all to be aware of what we're proposing. So what we did for heavy manufacturing, it's under manufacturing, heavy, is it's basically, we put in activities or processes that would necessitate the storage of large volumes of highly flammable toxic matter or explosive materials. We also took, because in the industrial districts, there was a lot of uses that were only allowed in I2, for example. We took a lot of those terms and we put it into the definition of heavy manufacturing. So what we have is this term includes, but is not limited to, fabrication of metal, chemical manufacturing, stonework or concrete products, manufacturing of mining machinery, motor vehicle manufacturing, lumber milling, and permanent concrete batch plant. And what we did was we also defined manufacturing light and manufacturing medium. Now, we definitely struggled internally with these of how to define them and making sure we were trying to capture what would work for the town. So happy to take feedback on it. Basically, the really more intensive things that have flammable or louder noises are going to be your heavy manufacturing. And that's basically what was already allowed in that I2 currently.
Okay, and was it allowed in the general commercial previously, or is that a new conditional use we're setting up?
So give me a second to pull up general commercial existing.
Yeah, that's the red flag for me. I don't know why it would be in GC and not LI.
So, and happy to change that. What we have in GC currently is it conditional use? Someone has it up right now.
It's listed as conditional in table 4.3, yes.
Okay, so conditional use for GC right now does include vehicle sales service, automobile body shops, machine and welding shops, manufacturing and industrial uses typically, and it includes metal finishing, power generation, transformer stations, paper, plastic, wood manufacturing. So those are all uses currently by conditional use in the GC. happy to remove that. And again, if, I think that's why we went conditional to still keep it that way.
Katie, I'm confused. A couple of meetings ago, I brought up the uses in industrial and you said that we weren't going to really talk about uses. Specifically brought up commercial parking and you said that through this process, we're going to deal with the uses, especially in industrial later, because we had the conversation that the I1 and the I2 are now GI overlap and they're confusing and about as clear as mud. And you said that we weren't going to really talk about this process and now we're talking about it. I kind of feel left out.
No, that's a great thought and a great point. So I guess let's take a step back, and we started that. And then at the last meeting, it came up that the industrial, when we took every listed use in the I1 and the I2, and we put it in that land use table, all of a sudden it didn't make sense because there were so many in there that were very similar, such as under a manufacturing category. So then, and this is where we can revert back, we took kind of the direction, and maybe we didn't make it clear when we discussed it last month. We would take those and group them together a little bit more to make that more clear. And then by grouping them together, now we come up with manufacturing, light, medium, heavy, and we grouped those individual uses into those categories so that the land use table wasn't full of like 25 different types of manufacturing that were just I2 or now general industrial each. So it was something we talked about last month. Maybe we didn't make it clear, and maybe it was clear, but now that we did it, it doesn't work for the town. You feel like you need more discussion on it. And if that's the case, we can go back to all of those individual listed uses and state it. It just looked a little bit confusing for a user to read with all of them listed individually. So great point, and I'm happy to take any feedback. We definitely didn't try to do anything that we didn't think the town would support. But if it turned out to be that way, let's take it a step back.
Well, I brought it up a couple of meetings ago and I always wanted to roll up my sleeves and look at the industrial uses, and based on the comment we all made, I have not done that.
Yeah.
I think it's tough to interpret those, especially for the layperson. Those uses, and so I'm glad that Russ caught it, but I'd definitely like to look at it more.
Okay, no, I think that's great, and encourage it. And it looks like TJ has something to add too.
Yeah, again, this is that slippery slope. We're happy to do it. I want to again go all the way back to what our charge at this point is. And now I'm not suggesting that these aren't good conversations to have. What we're trying to do at this time is just take what's in the current code and move it to a more usable process layout, essentially. And one of those is to put it into a table, the uses into a table. And where we ran into other things is just right in front of me here. So in a use in one district might be machine and welding shops, and in another there might just be welding shops.
Right.
And so what we did is we tried to take those that are generally similar. And when I say similar, what we do when we look at uses is, from a land use perspective, is we look at the impacts. What's the operations? What kind of noise, odor, dust is going to be emitted? Where does it make some sense? And so we did, one, the charge that we were given early on is to not look at uses. So that is correct. But that conflicted, and as Katie mentioned, when we started to try to bring these things into one location, because of those conflicts that are in the current code itself, where there's terms that are different, slightly different, but probably mean the same in different zone districts, as well as some that are in some zone districts, but not in others. And so there's going to be an inherent struggle with that. I guess I would suggest that one of our goals is to ratchet these things up based on impacts. So to go back to my example here, where if a machine shop and a welding shop are the same impact, right? And what I mean by that is that you're bringing materials to the site, you're manufacturing them, you're adjusting them, you're assembling them to create a new product, and then distributing it. That is the operation, that is the use. And so what we've tried to do is take those and put those in that category as opposed to those more broad categories. And that's where I think we're running into the struggle right now.
Well, I agree with what you said, because we thought it was going to be different. I mean, the thing that I brought up is commercial parking. Commercial parking is only allowed in GC in the code. And I'm not really sure that's what we want. And commercial parking is not allowed in the industrial park. So if we're going to have a high-rise parking garage, do we want it in Ridgway, USA, or do we want it in the industrial park? So, and when I brought that up, we said, well, we're not going to discuss uses.
So all that said, can we bring this back to where we are and what you guys need from us? Because we're not going to settle all this tonight. We've had some great conversations and we've got some points that we know need to be discussed further in the future. And there's always going to be some conflicts in this as we look closely, but I think it's pretty clear that we're not set on outlawing anything that already exists. And we're just going to fine tune this and we're, you know, like I said, that those are grandfathered in. We're not kicking out the brew pub or the hardware store or anything like that. And we can move forward on this.
Yeah, and I would request maybe that just if people have the time over the next week, put some time into those definitions and compare that to the land use table and see if you agree that we're on track with how we consolidated and move forward. And if not, I think we need to know so we know if we need to kind of reorganize and take a
We
look.
shouldn't be asking questions about that until we read those.
Well, no, I mean,
No, that's not.
I think, I mean, I'm still a little hung up on Russ's heavy manufacturing question. I think, doesn't make any sense for it to be a conditional use in GC, but not in MI, or LI. If it's in GI, it, you know, I
Whoa, wait a minute. Now you're using old terms and new terms.
No, I'm not using old terms and new terms. I said M instead of L, but it's GC or light industrial or general industrial.
Okay.
Industrial is now buildings and code. It's a conditional use in general industrial and in GC, but not in light industrial. I think it should be moved out of GC and into light industrial, even though, I mean, I guess the slippery slope thing applies here. Do we start diving into the weeds on any of these, or do we put this on the list to dive into later? I'm just kidding.
It goes to the list to look at more closely.
I will say with what you're saying now, I definitely understand that. And I think based on the terms and how we put them in a light, medium, heavy, I personally don't see a concern with adding a conditional manufacturing, heavy, conditional, and light industrial. Again, we spent a lot of time on these and I can't say we felt 100% confident either in trying to figure out, be like TJ said, you have welding and you have machine and welding and they're allowed in different districts.
Right.
So we're trying to find that out, but taking that basic step, I see exactly what you're saying as I look at the chart and it does make sense that if we're going to allow, we can take heavy manufacturing out completely of GC or keep it as a conditional. And then no matter what, add it as a conditional in LI.
Great.
We can leave it as a conditional in GC probably.
Take it out.
Take it out, says the boss.
I don't like having manufacturing in GC. I think we need to protect our GC.
Okay, take it out of
There we go.
GC. Make it a conditional in LI.
We don't have much GC left.
Russ, did you have more stuff?
I had one more and it's not on the table. So it's down here in the fence, hedge and wall regulations.
What section?
The
The documents have the sections at the top.
That is 7.4F.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sure. And so I'm down on item 8, measuring fence height. And I can see that this has been adapted, I believe this has been adapted somewhat to address some concerns we had with some potential fencing a while back in town.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to just get a little bit of clarification. As I recall, that particular one did not have a retaining wall, and it seems that we are making that a requirement of this. There was an elevation change between the two lots. And what we had previously set up was that the height of the fence was from the lower lot. Looks like you've kind of moved it to the higher lot, but also I see reference in a diagram here to a midpoint of the retaining wall. So I guess I'm trying to clarify exactly what we're looking at on the overall height there, or is it just from the midpoint? And is a retaining wall an actual requirement?
It's not a requirement. This is just an example where a fence is constructed on top of a above ground retaining wall,
And
right?
I read it as from the midpoint on the retaining wall, the height is measured.
So for this one, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, TJ.
There are two separate situations under 8. 8 is measuring fence height A. A is more of a if there's a slope change, right? So it's measuring from the existing grade, right? So it's your typical. B is the one that we faced earlier, where the fence is on top of a retaining wall, where there's a quote unquote significant elevation change drastically from one property, one side of that fence to the other. And so that image, that graphic ties to B only, not A. So it says, if you're in this situation, this is how it's measuring. And what we kind of, I think, talked about through that variance request is that it didn't make sense to go to the low end, low side of that wall. So we're suggesting now to go to, in that situation. So in the situation where there's a fence on top of a retaining wall that is on the property lines, we would measure to the midpoint of the retaining wall to the top of the fence for the fence height.
Okay, and with our current regulations, that would be a 6-foot fence. So if it was a 4-foot retaining wall, then you could go 4 feet above the higher elevation. Is that what we're looking at?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, just trying to make sure I got my head wrapped around that. So.
Yep, and I'll be completely honest that this one's going to create issues at some point, right? But at least now we have a different situation where we can evaluate a variance request on its specific merits a little bit better than we were able to in this particular instance. And in town there is elevation change between properties, so I'm sure this isn't going to be the last time we encounter this.
No doubt. Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
I'm done with all my questions. Thank you all.
Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russ.
On that fence issue, is there any way that we can incorporate if both property owners agree that it could?
That's
That's
a
a variance?
That's a slippery slope,
That is, okay,
I think.
yeah, okay.
I want to call on Jennifer. She's been waiting.
Jennifer Cram, do you have some comments?
Yeah, I signed in a little bit late to this, and this is something that was discussed near the end of the last time, so possibly I missed something, but on page 29 of 94, it's talking about downtown service and district, and it says all professional offices and service business allowed as a conditional use shall have no more than 5 employees. And when this was brought up last time, John said, well, we're really getting at parking, but I don't know, this 5 employees seems a little weird. What you really mean, I think, is 5 parking spaces, first of all. And I'm not sure what business they are. You're going to go around and check the number of employees?
I'll try to take a quick stab at what we talked about last time. and where we kind of landed is, again, I'll go back to the slippery slope that we're not, we're trying hard to stay away from standards and changing standards. We did make a recommendation to shift this a little bit, but based on the last discussion, we went back and I think one of the big items on the planning commission's list or the town council's list is going to be evaluating the downtown service district and these standards. For that reason in particular, it is a difficult standard to apply and administer and enforce. But we're also trying to not get into the merits of the standards with this process. And I know that's not necessarily a good answer.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that I don't remember where we came up with the number of 5, but the intent was to keep the scale of the businesses manageable and in line with the kind of scale we were hoping to maintain and keep the sort of the residential feel of those areas within the DS overlay district. So, you know, I'm certainly open to coming up with a different standard, but I think TJ's right. I think this needs to be probably one we take up on our.
I would also add that it's probably on a case-by-case basis. So if somebody has, you know, more than that employees and they can tell us that some of those employees walk to work, you know, then they're good. We're not gonna, I don't think we're gonna hold to this super tight. It's just something to help us control the parking issue in that area.
I want to chime in here. I think that we talked about this last time. I don't think the employees is an adequate way to judge this, because now, you know, this downtown service area was implemented before Amazon and before all this. You could have one employee with 18 UPS trucks arriving. So but you could do a whole lot of employees is just the wrong way to go. I think it's you have to judge the impact in a different way, basically by traffic. So I think we definitely should look at it.
Well, yeah, I think the point is that it's all throughout the code. There are standards that are by their very nature going to be hard to enforce and monitor. So it's more important to try and come up with clearer ways to achieve the goals that we're trying to get.
Yeah, so what's your solution, Jack?
I think it's measured by traffic. I mean, if there's 2 people in there and there's minimal traffic, there could be just huge amounts of traffic with very few employees. And the traffic is going to impact the neighbors more than the employees. So employees can walk to work, they can be quiet inside the house, they can be shipping and receiving. That's intolerable. So we have to come up with a different way to judge the impact over employees or parking. I think it's more, I personally think it's traffic, but that's just one suggestion.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the table of uses, most everything is conditional use in DS anyway. So we'd have the ability to review that that was the goal.
I remember when it was acted, it was very strict, and we wanted it to be very residentially friendly. And but that was all before this Amazon stuff.
Just so everybody knows, I think I've said this before, but the reason the DS zone was created is because we were feeling a lot of pressure at town council to actually rezone that half block either side of 62 all the way from the existing town B up to the Amelia Street as retail, as state B. And we felt really strongly we didn't want to have, you know, strip commercial all the way up 62. So this was a compromise. Aware of the traffic noise impacts on people who are living in that half block closest to the highway, and that they might want to have something kind of in between. And I think it's a creative solution, but because it's creative, it comes with some unintended consequences.
So I think for now, we leave it until we come up with a better way to state it.
Keeping most of uses conditional is the best way to do it.
Russell, check on it for us.
And
What
I'll
else?
just give one quick follow-up for you that just as a side note, after we had the discussion with you and we decided to keep it in, we were running this by town staff and the attorney, and they actually had agreed with you also that it should remain as is for now and just be up for future discussion. So if it helps you a little bit also, it wasn't just planning commission this sole thought. It was also other discussions that happened with town staff and other history of the town that felt that who agreed completely about the reason that district was created and trying to keep that balance for right now. So just if it helps you a little bit with maintaining what you have right now, it was echoed by town staff also. So
It helps us to move on, then so be it.
Jennifer Cram, did you have anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Sorry, one other thing, sorry. I think it's important to understand too that a site plan, the town does not currently have a site plan process. By instituting a site plan process, and this is page 19 or 18 of the zoning regulations, section 4, it gives us an opportunity to memorialize and evaluate changes of use and uses at a whole new level that is currently available. And I say that because even though it's a difficult standard to interpret or apply, say, with employees, the site plan process, that requirement gives us the ability, the staff, the ability to have that conversation and understand the impacts. So we have some flexibility through that process as well. And then that will manifest its way through an approval. So again, this isn't just one standard in by itself. The site plan process, I think, is integral to the whole system to ensure that these standards are being met. And there are requirements for when a site plan is required. And one of them are let's see here, it's any new use, any modification to an existing use that is quote unquote significant, and any modification where the existing limits are exceeded, and there's some reasons, some exemptions to site plan. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that again, looking at it as a holistic package and system, not just one standard by itself.
Great. Preston, you got anything?
Any questions or comments?
Yeah.
I got them all answered.
You got nothing?
Not right now.
Anyone else? We're just about to wrap this up. Anyone got a burning desire to speak?
Yeah, I have, no, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
I was like, oh my God, really? All right, you guys don't have any more questions from us?
I think it would be helpful. Katie, do you mind bringing up the slide that depicts the remaining timeline? Please.
Oh, we're not done, Jack.
We're
We're close.
pretending we're getting,
He's getting cold.
I'm giving everybody a hand.
So I think we need to have a conversation here. I do think it's possible, and TJ or Katie can correct me or let me know if they think differently, but I do think it's possible to have an ordinance prepared with the direction that was provided tonight for the March 28th regular planning commission meeting for you all to provide to review it another time and provide a formal recommendation to the town council. Once it gets to the town council level, April 12th would be the introduction of the ordinance, and then whatever the regular meeting in May is, that's when second meeting would take place. So there would be two public the introduction at the town council level doesn't require a public hearing formally, but I think we've followed that line. So the 2 public hearings at town council level are possible here. So we're looking at early May for adoption and codification 30 days after that. I bring that up because and maybe I mentioned at the last planning commission meeting, but staff will be recommending to the town council at next week's meeting that the temporary moratorium be extended for several months to fall in line with this timeline. And I think you guys have the background and understanding of why those need to be married in some capacity. So just FYI.
So would it be till the end of May or the end of June?
Good question. We'll have to do some arithmetic and want to see what everyone thinks here, but
Seems like the end of May,
May, probably
So when is staff gonna recommend to town council?
next week.
next week.
Otherwise, it ends at the end of this month, end of March.
I want to attend that.
Great. I think that sounds good. Do we know if there's any public hearings on the agenda for March 28th?
I don't think we know. I don't think there's going to be, but
Don't we have 4 months to
no, that's not possible now. So no,
2
no.
months.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Bruce, I don't think there's anything on March.
Well,
4 months.
it's
Oh,
His dad a 2-month extension.
This is 1 month. That
Yeah,
would be 2.
that'd be 2.
yeah. So Fort will have to come back with presumably at this point another extension request because I don't think we've received anything to date. Last thing I want to bring up. Katie and TJ suggested a work session for the development community in mid-April or whatever. I love that idea. I hope that you all do as well. Maybe a how-to type of workshop of how to navigate the code.
Sounds great.
And beyond. Yeah, I just want to make sure everyone was on board with that. They hadn't broached the subject with me, but they must have known that it was going to be a dynamite idea.
I wonder if the developers.
Jay's smiling. When we
We
received,
may not have talked about it till kind of last minute today.
Wonderful idea.
I would put 3 question marks.
Yeah.
when we receive the next version of this, are we expected to read the entire, in entirety again?
Yeah, on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th is our deadline for you guys. So we're gonna keep you busy that weekend.
Yeah, my question is just if that's realistic, are we just, we've read most of the content. I'm serious, is
Yeah.
that what the expectations are?
That's not a question for staff to answer. I mean, whatever you all feel comfortable with, you were appointed for a reason because you're interested in serving on this board, and the approach that you've taken to date in navigating these proposed code changes, everyone's different. I guess I'll leave it at that. Everyone learns differently and likes to approach things differently. So if your question is, do we need to read everything again? I'm not going to say, I don't think we should say yes. Because, everyone's approach is different, but, Mary Clark may say, yeah, I'm going to read everything. Jack may say, I'm only going to concentrate on certain sections because I read all the other sections already.
I'm not very smart. I'll reread it.
I'm gonna read everything. I'm
He's
still
gonna
learning.
reprint it.
Well, I put it on newspaper, so you wouldn't be part time.
The one thing I'll say that we were gonna try, we'll try to help in that case is, and Katie and I haven't talked about this in particular, but if you all think it would be helpful, we can accept all the changes as of tonight and do red lines based on what you've already read. And so that way you know exactly what's changed from tonight.
That's a great.
I think that's great, and that's why I bring this up. I think
Yeah.
everyone's done a really great job on the commission of asking good questions, and they've obviously read it. At least most of it, so I'm not like trying to fault anyone. I just want to be clear on what expectations are and what we should be doing with this, because, asking someone to read it 3 or 4 times, like I had to actually literally took a nap between reading it because if I'm asleep, I'm like, oh my God.
Only one?
Just chapters
one.
still.
The scope is.
And we can try to get you more of a rollout again. I don't know if that really helps too much, but at least just so you're not getting all of it at one time, especially because now you'll be seeing. I don't personally think you really need to put much effort into the chapter 6 and 8 that we'll send that just deleting language, but you're gonna see even more things being published this next time.
Well, and maybe just note that in your narrative, like as a reminder, chapter 6 and 8 are just things that were pulled out, you know, feel free to review it, but I thought that what you guys did was really helpful. I thought that the time frame was great. It really worked.
Okay, and I will give one disclaimer to accepting all track changes as of right now is that I did add a lot of section numbers and flow charts. So it's not content, but if I accept it right now, they're gonna look like they already were changed and you didn't see the change. Is everyone okay that the section numbers will just become ingrained in it? And that just means, or else I'd have to go back a version, save it, and do
Okay.
all the section numbers again.
I'm okay with section numbers.
Okay, so they will be in there as an accepted change, but it's not like anything that you need to be checking or reviewing. And we will be doing our own internal check to make sure every single citation is correct. So don't feel like you have to check that kind of things when you read it. So.
That's great. That answered my question. Thank you. And I think that this schedule, this is reasonable. I don't have a problem with this schedule.
Let's do it.
You good?
I mean, I think it depends on if these guys can get through it, but I think they probably can.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, and I have a good list from tonight. So thank you. I just want to say one thing I noticed mostly tonight, but I've kind of picked up on it, and this is a compliment, is how different what you look at comes out of each person. And I think it's really great because you're actually so well-rounded as a commission that you focused in on different parts of the code and you all had different comments. So it was kind of nice hearing that everyone looked at different things that they have more focus on. And I think it helps me feel like confident in the review that we received from you too. So, and nice that you are such a well-rounded group. So.
This is the 18th.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you.
Good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Yep. Have a good month, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone. Stay warm.
Cheers.
Night, y'all.
We have a few more items on here, pretty simple. I need a motion to approve the minutes from the January 31st meeting. You can't because you
I
weren't
wasn't
here.
there. Okay, I was.
Jack,
Second.
and then can we get a roll call vote? And it's only people that were at the meeting that can vote.
Sure. Okay, are we ready?
Yep.
Commissioner Nelson. We're approving the minutes. Commissioner Nelson.
Jennifer?
You said Nelson? Oh, aye.
Petroselli,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Clark,
Aye.
and Chairperson Montague.
Aye.
Okay.
And then the only other business we have are any updates from planning commission members or from town council members. Did you have anything for us, John?
Nope.
Preston?
Nothing else.
I want to talk about some town council stuff. I want to do it off the record, so.
Okay, yeah, and I already said it, but thanks for your efforts for everybody reading this. I think everyone seemed really well informed.
It's the 18th.
We knew what they were talking about. So that's great. And thank you, those guys. Thank you, Russ and Jennifer also.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Then if there's nothing else, I will adjourn the meeting.
Seconded.
Need a second for that.
Needed to hammer.
Right, Russ. Thanks, everybody, Jennifer.
Bye.
Good night.